Left the barn, the old dog moving slow. Left the barn, the old dog moving slow, the way he always did in the cold months, his gray muzzle close to the ground, his breathing steady and unhurried. Duke was 11 years old and had earned the right to move at whatever pace he chose. Jesse never rushed him. They had been walking the western fence line since before the sun cleared the mountains the way Jesse walked it every morning. Not because the fence needed checking every single day. He knew that. The fence was fine. The fence had been fine for 3 years running. But a man needed somewhere to put his feet in the morning. A man needed a reason to be moving before the quiet of the house settled into his chest like groundwater. Clara had not woken up yet. She would sleep another hour, maybe 2. And when she came downstairs she would want her oatmeal with the brown sugar on top, not stirred in but resting on the surface the way her mother used to serve it. Jesse had learned this in the first weeks after Martha passed. He had learned it the hard way, the way fathers learn most things, by getting it wrong first and watching his daughter's face and understanding without words what he had missed. He had gotten good at reading faces. He had gotten good at silence. The morning was cold enough to see his breath. October had come in hard this year, pushing down from the Bighorn Range with a wind that smelled like iron and pine. The grass along the fence line had gone brown at the tips, but still held some green near the roots fighting it. Jesse respected that about grass. It did not know when to quit. He was pulling a loose staple from the third post when Duke stopped moving. Jesse did not look up immediately. Duke stopped sometimes. Old dogs did that. They stood and considered things that younger animals ran past without noticing. Jesse had learned not to interpret every pause. But then Duke did not move again. And then Duke made a sound that Jesse had not heard from him in 11 years of living together. Not a bark. Not the low warning rumble Duke used when coyotes came near the chicken coop at night. Something different. Something that started in the dog's chest and came out of his throat like a question that already knew its answer was bad. Jesse looked up. Duke was facing the creek. Canfield Creek ran along the southern edge of Jesse's property, maybe 300 yards down the slope from where he stood. In summer it ran fast and cold, fed by snowmelt from the mountains. In October it slowed to something more considered, moving through the bends with the deliberateness of a thing that had been patient long enough. Duke was not moving toward the creek. He was standing at the top of the slope, head low, that sound still coming from somewhere deep in him. Clara's voice came from behind Jesse. He had not heard her approach. She was 7 years old and she moved like smoke when she wanted to, her small boots barely touching the ground. "Papa, I hear him. He's crying different." Jesse set the staple puller down against the fence post. He looked at his daughter. She was still in her nightgown under her coat, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, her eyes on Duke with the kind of calm attention she had gotten from her mother, that gift of looking at something difficult without flinching away. "Go back to the house," he said. "I want to come." "Clara." She pressed her lips together and stayed where she was. This was also something she had gotten from her mother. Jesse went down the slope alone. The creek made its sound in the background, that low, continuous conversation with the stones on its bed. The frost on the grass crunched softly under his boots. He moved through the cottonwood trees at the bottom of the slope, their leaves mostly gone now, their bare branches making a gray lacework against the sky. He smelled it before he saw it. Not blood, not yet. Something else. The smell of a body that had been in cold water, and then out of it, the particular combination of creek mud and sweat, and something medicinal that he could not name. She was lying face down at the edge of the bank. His first thought, arriving before he could stop it, was that she was dead. She was absolutely still. Her dark hair was spread in the mud around her, heavy with water. Her clothing was torn in multiple places, the fabric of her dress dark and wet, pressed flat against her back and legs. One arm was extended forward, the fingers of her hand dug into the bank as though she had been trying to pull herself up and had simply run out of the thing that pulling required. Jesse moved toward her and dropped to one knee and put 2 fingers against the side of her neck. The pulse was there, thin, inconsistent, like a lamp flame in a room where someone had left the window open. But there. He turned her over slowly, supporting her head with one hand, keeping his movements deliberate and careful. Her face was not a thing he was ready for. The left side was swollen and discolored shades of purple and deep red that told him this had been done within the last day or two. Her lip was split. There was dried blood along her hairline above her left ear. She was Apache. He could see that clearly in the structure of her face beneath the damage, the high cheekbones, the dark complexion now pale with cold and shock and blood loss. She was probably 30 years old, though it was difficult to be sure. She had been beaten by someone who understood how to hurt a person without finishing them immediately. Jesse had seen that before. He knew what it meant. He moved to check her arms and stopped. Her right hand was still clenched into a fist against her side, the fingers curled so tightly that the knuckles had gone white. Whatever she was holding, she had been holding it through everything that had been done to her, through however long she had been in that creek, through the crawl to the bank. Her hand had kept its grip when the rest of her had given out. Jessie pried her fingers open gently one by one. Inside was a small piece of worked leather, the kind used for marking an agreement or a ceremony, worn smooth with handling, etched with a symbol he did not recognize. Wrapped around the leather, knotted 3 times, was a thin length of metal chain. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at the chain more carefully. It was a dog tag lanyard. Military issue. United States Army, the same dark metal he had seen on 100 soldiers passing through Wyoming territory in the last decade. There was no tag on it, just the chain. And pressed into the inside of one of the links, barely visible, was a unit designation stamped into the metal during manufacture. 3rd Cavalry, Fort Renner. Jesse closed his hand around the chain and the leather and put both in his coat pocket. He did not think about why he did this before anyone else arrived. He did not examine the instinct. He simply acted on it the way a man acts when something in him recognizes danger before his mind has finished the sentence. He put his arms under her and lifted. She weighed almost nothing. He felt her ribs shift slightly when he adjusted his hold, and she made a sound, a small helpless sound that she was not fully conscious enough to be embarrassed by, and Jesse tightened his grip and started walking back toward the slope. Clara was standing at the top of the cottonwoods. She had come down from the fence line despite being told not to. She was looking at the woman in her father's arms with those steady brown eyes, and she did not scream, and she did not run. "Her hands are bleeding, Papa." "I know it." She was still holding something even when she was asleep. Jesse looked at his daughter for a moment. Clara had a gift for noticing the thing that mattered inside the thing that was visible. Martha had called it an old soul. Jesse called it something he did not have a name for, yet something that made him feel in moments like this one that his daughter was going to be all right in the world in a way that he was not always certain about for himself. "I know," he said again. "Get the horse." He did not take her to the house first. He took her directly to Doc Owen Slade's place on the east side of Canfield, coming in through the back way, not through the main street of town, not past the general store or the saloon, or any of the places where people stood and looked at things going past and then discussed what they had seen. He did not know precisely why he made that choice. He would think about it later and not have a clean answer. A man acts on what he knows before he knows it sometimes. Jesse had been living in Wyoming long enough to have learned that instinct was usually information with a shorter processing time. Doc Slade came to his back door in his shirt sleeves, coffee cup in one hand, and took one look at what Jesse was carrying and stepped aside without a word. The examination took 40 minutes. Jesse stood against the wall of the examination room the entire time, arms crossed, watching Slade work. Clara sat on a wooden chair in the hallway outside, her boots not reaching the floor, drawing something in the small notebook she carried everywhere. When Slade finished and had covered the woman with a blanket up to her chin, he set down his instruments and stood very still for a moment with his back to Jesse. It was a posture Jesse recognized from the 2 times he had seen it before. Once when Slade had told a rancher his wife would not survive the winter. Once when Slade had come to Jesse's own house 2 years ago and stood in the bedroom doorway with that same stillness. 3 ribs, Slade said, 2 on the left side, 1 on the right. Shoulder was dislocated, shoved back in without care. The cuts on her arms are defensive, she was fighting back. The bruising around her throat is layered more than one occasion. He stopped. "Owen." Jesse said. "Someone starved her before they beat her." Slade's voice had gone flat in the way it went flat when he was managing something. Not missed meals. Weeks of deliberate reduction. This was not a loss of temper. This was a program. Jesse said nothing. Slade turned around. He was 60 years old, thin in the way of men who forgot to eat when they were thinking with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses that he cleaned obsessively when he was worried. He was cleaning them now. "I need to ask you something," Slade said. "Ask." "Where exactly did you find her?" "Canfield Creek, southern edge of my property." Slade put his glasses back on, looked at the woman on the table, then looked at Jesse with an expression that Jesse could not immediately read, something between recognition and something older than recognition, something like a man who has been waiting for a knock on a specific door and has just heard it. "Have you seen wounds like this before?" Jesse asked. Slade took a breath. "Jesse, have you?" The doctor looked away, picked up his glasses again even though he had just put them on. The gesture of a man buying time he did not actually have. "Not on a living patient," Slade said finally, very quietly. Jesse heard the weight in that sentence. He did not ask the question that weight invited because something told him this was not the moment for it. The moment was coming. He could feel it the way you feel weather coming in from the mountains, that pressure change in the air, that specific quality of stillness before the temperature drops. "She'll live," Jesse asked instead. "Her body will." Slade set his glasses down on the instrument tray. "The rest is a longer road." Jesse nodded once, went to the hallway door and opened it. Clara looked up from her notebook. "We're taking her to the ranch," Jesse said. "Get your coat." Clara closed the notebook and stood up. She did not ask why. She did not ask who the woman was or what was going to happen. She put on her coat and took her father's hand when he offered it, and they walked back out through Doc Slade's back door into the cold October morning. And behind them, alone in the examination room, Owen Slade stood with his hands flat on the table beside the unconscious woman and stared at the wall. His lips moved slightly the way a man's lips move when he is working through an arithmetic problem that keeps coming out wrong. He had been getting the wrong answer for 2 years. He was beginning to understand why. That night, after Clara had fallen asleep, Jesse sat at the kitchen table alone. The lamp was burning low. Outside, the wind moved through the cottonwoods along the creek and made the sound that wind in cottonwoods makes, a papery, restless sound like something trying to say something in a language just barely outside the range of understanding. He put the chain and the leather piece on the table in front of him. He had been looking at the chain periodically all day, picking it up and setting it down, not looking at it directly, the way you sometimes have to approach a thing that you already know is going to change the arrangement of other things. 3rd Cavalry, Fort Renner. Jesse sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a long time. 2 years ago in late September, a detail of soldiers from the 3rd Cavalry out of Fort Renner had stopped at his property for a single night, requesting water for their horses and a place to camp in the lower pasture. Jesse had agreed. He had not had reason to do otherwise. They were orderly and quiet, and their commanding officer had walked up to the house at dusk and shaken Jesse's hand with the kind of firm, sociable grip that men practice, and had said something complimentary about the ranch, and had smiled in the way of a man who smiled as a professional technique rather than a personal expression. Jesse had noticed that about him, had filed it without knowing why. 3 days after that detail rode east, Martha began running a fever. Jesse rose from the table and went to the bedroom. Not the main bedroom, which he had not slept in since Martha passed. The small room off the kitchen where he kept his desk and his account books, and the box of things he had not been able to decide what to do with. In the bottom drawer under a stack of survey maps was an old tin box. Inside the tin box, wrapped in a piece of flannel, was a small square of fabric, dark blue wool about 2 inches on each side. Jesse had cut it from the fence post on the day he found it snagged there after the soldiers departed. He had cut it and kept it without knowing why, one of those small, instinctive acts that sit in the back of a drawer for years, waiting for the moment that explains them. He brought it to the kitchen table, held it under the lamp next to the chain. The fabric was the same dark blue as standard 3rd Cavalry issue, and along one selvage edge, almost too small to see, was a stamped unit designation, faded but legible. Jesse set them down side by side on the table. He sat there for a long time in the quiet kitchen with the wind moving through the cottonwoods outside and the lamp burning down, and the woman sleeping in the back bedroom where Clara had insisted on sitting until she fell asleep herself. The arithmetic was wrong. He had known it was wrong for 2 years, the way a man sometimes knows that a beam in his house has gone bad without being able to locate the rot, feeling it in the slight give of the floor, in the way the door in the far room no longer swings quite true. He had the number for the unit now. He did not yet know the name of the officer who had given the order. He would. He folded both pieces and put them together in his coat pocket. Then he got up and blew out the lamp and stood in the dark kitchen for a moment before going to check on Clara, on the stranger in his back bedroom on the ranch that was quiet in the way ranches are quiet at night when something has changed and has not yet decided to announce itself. She woke on the 2nd day. Jesse was not in the room when it happened. Clara was. She had been there most of the morning, the way she had been there most of the previous day, sitting on the wooden chair she had pulled close to the bed and working through her notebook with the methodical seriousness that she brought to everything she considered worth doing. She was drawing a horse, a particular horse, the dun mare in the north pasture, who had a habit of standing with her head over the fence and watching the road as though expecting a specific visitor. The woman's breathing changed. Clara heard it, that subtle shift from the deep, irregular breathing of unconsciousness to something more organized, something that had intention behind it. Clara closed her notebook, set it on her knees, waited. The woman opened her eyes. She did not call out. She did not ask where she was. She lay still and looked at the ceiling with the practiced stillness of a person who has learned that announcing yourself before you understand your situation is a form of information you cannot take back. She looked at the ceiling for a long moment, then moved her eyes slowly and deliberately around the room. The window, the door, the walls, the chair. Clara. Her gaze settled on Clara and stayed there. The child was 7 years old, dark-haired, wearing a blue dress with a patch on the left knee, her feet in their stockings not quite reaching the floor. She was holding a notebook to her chest and looking back at the woman with the specific quality of attention that children deploy when they have decided something is interesting and have committed to understanding it. She was not frightened. That was the first thing. "My name is Clara," the girl said. "Papa's name is Jesse. Papa said I wasn't supposed to talk too much because you need to rest. But he didn't say I couldn't talk at all. If you need water, I can get some." The woman looked at this child, at the patch on the knee, at the notebook clutched against the small chest, at the face that was open and direct in the way of children who have been loved enough to believe that looking at something directly is safe. "Water," the woman said. Her voice came out wrong, roughened and compressed, like something that had been under pressure for a long time. But it was a word. It was a clear and specific word directed at a specific person requesting a specific thing. Clara slid off the chair and went out of the room without running, with a kind of disciplined purposefulness that was somewhat unusual in a 7-year-old. The woman looked at the ceiling again, took inventory of her body. 3 ribs, she knew about those, the pain was familiar by now, a specific old enemy. The shoulder was better than it had been. Whoever had treated it had done it properly this time. She was warm. She was dry. The bed beneath her was a real bed. She heard boots on the porch outside, not hurried. A particular weight, a particular rhythm. The man who appeared in the doorway was tall and lean in the way of men who work outside in all weather, with dark hair going gray at the temples and a face that had been weathered past the point where age was easy to estimate. He was somewhere between 35 and 45, his face carrying the kind of stillness that comes not from an absence of feeling, but from a long practice of not letting feeling run ahead of thought. He stopped in the doorway, did not come in. "I don't know your name," he said. She looked at him, read him the way she had learned to read people quickly, the specific skill of a person whose survival has depended on accurate, rapid assessment of strangers. He was not holding anything. His hands were at his sides, relaxed. He was standing slightly back from the frame, not filling the space, not using his size to take up the entrance. He was not between her and the door. She had noticed that immediately, the way she noticed it in every room now where the door was, and whether the person near her was standing between her and it. He was not. "Nadie," she said. "Jesse Harlow. This is my ranch." He paused. "You're here until you're strong enough to leave. No conditions beyond that." "You're not curious." "I am," he said. "But what you tell me is yours to give. When you want to give it, you will." He looked at her for another moment. Something moved through his expression very briefly, too quickly to catch and identify. Then he reached into his coat pocket and came out with the leather piece and the chain. He held them toward her without crossing the threshold. Nadie looked at his hand, at what he was holding. "You kept them," she said. "I put them away before anyone else arrived. I don't know yet if that was the right thing, but it seemed like information you should have back." She held out her hand. He crossed the room just far enough to place them in her palm, then stepped back again. Clara reappeared with a cup of water, moving around her father with the ease of a child navigating a known geography, and handed it to the woman in the bed and watched her drink with solemn satisfaction. "You'll want more than that," Jesse said. "Ruth Pember is bringing food this evening. You don't have to see anyone you don't want to see. I'll tell her to leave it at the door." "Who is Ruth Pember?" "She runs the general store. She's the person I trust most in this town, which is why she's the only one I've told." Nadie looked at him again. "Why would you trust me with that information?" Jesse considered this. His consideration was visible, not performed, the genuine working of a man who believes a question deserves actual thought before an answer. "Because you're in my house," he said, "and in my house the people here deserve to know what's true." He turned to go, then stopped. "There's a bolt on the inside of this door," he said. "The front door key is on the kitchen table. You can leave any time, day or night. The gray mare in the north pasture is the easiest to ride." He left. His boots on the floor retreated toward the kitchen. Nadie sat with the cup in her hands and the chain and the leather piece in her fist and listened to him go. She heard the back door open, the brief surge of cold air, the door close again. She heard Clara follow her father out the lighter step, the smaller weight. She looked at the window, the gray October sky, the tops of the cottonwoods moving in the wind. She had run 3 times. Each time she had been found. She was still here. That was either very good or very bad, and she had not yet decided which. She closed her fist around the chain and held it against her chest and lay back and stared at the ceiling, working through the arithmetic of the last 2 days. She was alive. She was warm. A man had put a key to his front door on the kitchen table and told her where the easiest horse was. She had been told many things in her life. Some of them had turned out to be true. Ruth Pember arrived at dusk. Jesse answered the door, spoke with her for a moment in a low voice that Nadie could not make out from the bedroom, and then Ruth's footsteps came down the hall, and there was a single knock on the bedroom door. "I'm going to come in," Ruth said, not asking, stating with a tone that was somehow not aggressive about it. "My hands are full of food and I can't turn the knob." Nadie said nothing. Ruth took this as permission, which in some way it was. She was 55 years old, built solidly with gray-streaked hair pinned up without particular attention, and hands that bore the evidence of 30 years of hard work. She set a tray on the small table beside the bed, soup and bread, and a portion of apple that someone had sliced carefully. She pulled the chair close and sat in it. She did not ask Nadie who she was. She did not ask what had happened or where she had come from or what she planned to do next. She talked about the weather and the fact that the Henderson boy had finally gotten his barn re-roofed before winter, and the quality of this year's apple crop versus last year's, which had been disappointing. After 15 minutes of this, Nadie said, "You're not asking." Ruth looked at her directly, and in her eyes was something that was not simple kindness. It was something harder and older than kindness, something that had been through a specific kind of fire. "I made a choice once," Ruth said. "To not ask, to not get involved, to keep my head down and let something happen that I could have slowed down, maybe stopped." She paused. "I have to live with that." I decided a while back that I wasn't going to do it again." The room was quiet for a moment. "Who was she?" Nady asked. Ruth looked at her hands in her lap. "Martha Harlow," she said. "Wife of the man whose ranch you're sitting in." The lamplight moved on the wall. Outside the wind picked up and the cottonwoods made their sound. Nady sat with this information and let it arrange itself alongside what she already knew. She thought about the man in the doorway, the way he had placed the chain and the leather in her hand without crossing into the room, the way he had told her exactly where the key was and which horse was easiest. A man building a fence he hopes you'll choose not to climb. She thought about that for a long time after Ruth left. The third evening. Jesse was sitting on the porch in the dark after Clara went to sleep, the rifle he kept by the back door resting across his knees, not out of fear exactly, but out of the same instinct that makes a man bank the fire carefully before he sleeps, the acknowledgement that the world does not stop being the world just because you are tired. He heard the door open behind him. Light footsteps. Nady came out onto the porch and lowered herself carefully onto the top step, favoring her left side. She was wearing the clean clothes Ruth had brought, which were a little large on her. She looked out at the dark ranch yard, the shapes of the barn and the water tower, the line of cottonwoods at the edge of the property. Jesse did not say anything. He did not ask if she should be up, did not comment on her being there, did not adjust his position to accommodate or acknowledge her arrival beyond a single brief glance to confirm she was there and upright. She sat. He sat. The night moved around them. The stars above Wyoming were ridiculous in their extravagance, the kind of sky that exists only away from cities dense and deep and going back forever. A coyote called from somewhere past the eastern fence. Another answered from farther north. "You chop wood like you're angry at it," Nady said, not looking at him. Jesse was quiet for a moment. "I'm angry at a lot of things," he said. "Wood is the least destructive option." Another silence. The coyotes called back and forth twice more, and then went quiet. "What are you angry at?" she asked. He considered it honestly, the way he considered things that deserved consideration. "Not knowing something I should have known," he said, "for 2 years." Nady turned her head and looked at him. He was looking out at the yard, his face in profile, the lamplight from the kitchen window touching one side of it. "What happens when you find it out?" she asked. He did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice was level and quiet, and contained something that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but lived in the same country as both. "Then I'll know what to do with it." She looked at him for another moment, then looked back out at the yard. They sat together in the dark for a long time without speaking again. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of two people who have both been carrying something heavy and have, without discussing it, set their loads down in the same place to rest for a moment. Inside the house, Clara slept with her notebook on the pillow beside her. Outside, the cottonwoods moved in the wind, and the creek ran somewhere below the slope, and the stars burned their ancient, indifferent light down over the Wyoming territory, indifferent to the small, fierce lives being lived beneath them. Jesse put his hand in his coat pocket, felt the square of dark blue fabric and the metal chain. 2 years of wrong arithmetic. He was beginning to understand where the error was. And later that night, after Nady had gone back inside and the lamp in the kitchen had gone dark, Sheriff Hank Pruitt rode up the lane on his roan horse in the way that a man rides when he has something to say that he does not want to be seen saying. He tied his horse at the post and came up to the porch and sat down in the chair Nady had been sitting in an hour before. "Jesse," he said. "Hank. Major Frank Aldridge came through Canfield this morning, with 6 men. Jesse did not move. "He was asking about a woman," Pruitt said. "Apache woman traveling alone. Said she was disturbed. Said there'd been trouble and she was a danger to herself." He paused. He left a description. "He's polite about it, Frank Aldridge. He's always polite." "What did you tell him?" "I told him I hadn't heard anything." Pruitt tugged at the brim of his hat. "Jesse, Aldridge isn't somebody I want trouble with. He has reach. He has paper. He has the kind of friends that make problems go away in directions you don't expect." "What are you here to tell me, Hank?" Pruitt was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm here to tell you to be careful. And I'm here because you're the closest thing I have to a friend in this county, and I wanted to see your face when I told you." He stood up. "He'll be back. He doesn't let things sit." "I hear you." Pruitt looked at him for a moment longer. "Whatever's in your house, Jesse, you know what you're doing?" Jesse looked out at the dark. "Not entirely," he said, "but I know why." Pruitt nodded once, untied his horse, rode back down the lane into the dark. Jesse sat alone on the porch with the rifle across his knees and the chain in his pocket and the sound of the creek below the slope running over its stones in the dark, carrying whatever the mountain sent down to it, patient and cold and keeping its own counsel. He thought about Martha. He thought about the way she had looked at him sometimes with an expression he had not understood, then something behind her eyes that was not worry exactly, more like the face of a person who has decided to protect someone from information and is bearing the weight of that decision alone. He had thought it was his imagination. He had thought in the worst of the grief that he had invented depths in her that had not been there, a common delusion of the bereaved. He did not think that anymore. He reached into his coat pocket and touched the chain. Fort Renner. Frank Aldridge. He was not angry in the explosive way that some men were angry. He was angry in the geological way, the slow movement of weight over time, the kind that reshapes what it passes through. He could wait, but he could feel sitting there in the dark that the waiting was ending. 2 weeks passed, the way weeks pass on a working ranch in October, through the accumulation of small necessary tasks, the mending and the feeding and the checking of things that needed checking, the daily metabolism of a place that did not stop requiring attention simply because the people inside it were carrying difficult things. Nadie did not recover in the dramatic way that people recovered in stories. There was no single morning where she woke up transformed, no clear line between broken and mended. It happened instead the way water works on stone, gradually through repetition, through the simple accumulative effect of days that did not punish her for existing in them. The first week she ate in the bedroom. She slept 12, sometimes 14 hours. She moved from the bed to the chair and back again, and on the third day she stood at the window for 20 minutes, looking out at the ranch yard, with an expression that Jesse, passing in the hallway, saw through the open door and did not interrupt. She was memorizing it. He recognized the act. He had done the same thing himself in the weeks after Martha passed, standing at windows and cataloging what he saw as though the ordinary world needed to be verified against some internal record that kept insisting it had changed. The second week she began coming to the kitchen in the early mornings. She came before Jesse, which was remarkable because Jesse rose before the sun had fully committed to the day, driven by the kind of sleeplessness that had nothing to do with insomnia and everything to do with the particular weight that settled on him in the pre-dawn hours when the house was at its quietest and Martha's absence was at its loudest. The first morning he came downstairs to find her at the table with a cup of water sitting in the chair nearest the window. He stopped in the doorway. She looked at him. He looked at her. There was a moment of pure mutual acknowledgement, two people who had both believed they were alone in the early dark, discovering they were not. Jesse went to the stove without comment, made coffee, set a cup in front of her when it was ready, and took his own to the opposite end of the table and sat down. They did not speak for the first 20 minutes. This became a habit. It was Clara who first broke the formality between them, the way Clara broke most things that needed breaking, not through any deliberate effort, but simply by moving through the world with the blunt directness of a child who had not yet learned to arrange herself around other people's discomfort. On a Tuesday morning in the third week, she came downstairs while Jesse and Nadie were sitting at their customary ends of the table in their customary silence, and she made herself oatmeal with the brown sugar on top, and she sat between them and began to eat, and then she looked at Nadie and said, "Can you braid hair?" Nadie looked at the child. "Yes." "Papa can't." Clara glanced at her father with the serene ruthlessness of a 7-year-old delivering an accurate assessment. "He tries, but it comes out wrong. Mama used to do it, but Mama went to heaven." Jesse looked at his coffee. "After breakfast," Nady said. Clara nodded satisfied and returned to her oatmeal. Jesse looked up from his coffee and found Nady watching him with an expression he could not immediately identify. It was not pity. He had grown sensitive to pity in the 2 years since Martha passed. The specific quality of the look, the slight softening around the eyes, the careful management of the mouth. This was not that. It was something quieter, something that recognized what he was holding without reaching for it. He looked back at his coffee. They sat together in the warm kitchen while October pressed against the windows, and the coffee steamed and Clara ate her oatmeal, and the ranch made its early morning sounds around them. The horses shifting in the barn, the wind working at the eaves. It was on a Thursday, the 22nd day after he had found her at the creek, that Nady told him. Not everything. Not in one sitting. She began the way people begin when they have been carrying something for a long time and have almost forgotten the weight of it until they set a small piece of it down and feel the relief and understand that relief was possible, which is sometimes harder to accept than the burden itself. Clara was in school. Jesse had come in from the morning's work and found Nady at the kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee already poured, which was new, and understood this as a form of invitation. He sat down. She looked at the cup in front of her for a moment. Then she began. She had been born in the Wind River country, the daughter of a respected family and her band, raised in the tradition of her people, but educated also at the mission school in Lander, which was where she had learned English with the thoroughness that came from understanding that language was a form of power, and that being fluent in the language of the people who made the rules was not surrender, but strategy. She had a gift for it, not just English. The mechanics of translation, the way meaning shifted between languages and had to be carried across carefully, the way some things could not be translated at all and required instead a kind of equivalency, a new construction that preserved the weight of the original even when the words themselves changed. The Army had found this useful. For 3 years she had worked as an interpreter, and more than that, as a bridge between worlds that were moving toward each other at a speed that made collision likely and resolution possible only if the right words moved between them at the right moments. She had believed in the work. That was the thing she had to say clearly before she could say the rest. She had believed. Major Frank Aldridge had been posted to Fort Renner 4 years ago, and he was different from the officers she had worked with before. Sharper, more attentive to what she said and how she said it. He asked questions that went deeper than operational necessity questions about how her people thought about land and agreement and obligation. She had taken this as evidence of genuine interest in understanding. She had been wrong about what he was collecting the information for, but she had not been wrong that he was genuinely interested. Aldridge was always genuinely interested in anything that helped him understand leverage. In the spring of 1880, he came to her with a proposal. The bands of the Wind River country were under pressure from every direction. Settlers coming from the east, mining interests moving up from the south, the Army drawing lines on maps that did not correspond to any line that had meaning to the people who lived between them. Aldridge said he had authority to negotiate a protected settlement, a formal agreement that would designate a portion of the Wind River Valley as permanent Apache territory protected by federal guarantee. All that was required was a meeting between the band leaders and Army representatives, a formal ceremony of agreement, signatures, and witnesses. He said it would take 3 days. He said everyone would go home with something. Nady had sat with the proposal for a week. She had asked questions. She had pushed against the edges of it, looking for the soft places where things gave way. It had held up. The terms seemed genuine. The federal language seemed correct. Aldridge had shown her documents, letters from Washington correspondents that appeared authentic. She had said yes. She had gone to the elders. She had argued for the meeting. She had used her credibility, her years of demonstrated good faith, her family name, her own voice, the voice that had been trusted in difficult moments before. They had listened to her. She had led them to the meeting point in the valley 3 days north of the main camp, the location Aldridge had specified. 23 elders and senior men. The full authority of the band gathered in one place on her word. She stopped here. Jesse did not say anything. He had learned over these weeks when not to say anything. "I heard the horses first," she said. Her voice had gone to a different register, flat and factual in the way of a person narrating from a distance they have constructed through necessity. "From the north and the east. Too many. The wrong direction. And then I heard him give the order." Her hands were on the table still. "I ran," she said. "I ran because there was nothing else I could do, and because if I stayed I would die with them, and there would be no one left who knew what had happened. No one left who could say his name and mean it with knowledge behind it." Jesse looked at her hands on the table. He thought about the grip he had found at the creek, the fingers locked around the chain even in unconsciousness. "He knew you were the only one left," Jesse said. "He has been looking for me for 2 years." She paused. "I have been finding ways to survive and ways to send word, but the word has to go to the right place and reach the right person, and the right person has to be willing to carry it." "Gray Elk," Jesse said. She looked at him. He had heard the name once briefly in the first days when she was still half conscious and speaking in fragments, one of those words that surfaces from deep water when the ordinary controls are down. "He was the only elder who did not come to the meeting that day," she said. "He was ill, a fever. His grandson had come to the meeting in his place, and his grandson—" She stopped. "Gray Elk lost everyone. He had nothing left to protect except the truth." "Where is he now?" "He was moving south when I last had word, 3 weeks ago before Aldridge's men found me again." She looked at the window. "I was trying to reach him. The creek was not part of the plan." She said this last sentence with a dry flatness that might have been the beginning of something like dark humor, the kind of thing people develop at the border of survival and exhaustion. "He's still coming?" Jesse asked. "He will come," she said. "He has been trying to reach me for longer than I have been here. He carries something." She paused. "Martha knew about it." The kitchen went very quiet. Jesse looked at her across the table. "Say that again," he said. Nady met his eyes. "Before I reached Wyoming I had word from 2 directions. One from Gray Elk, who was already moving. One from a woman at a ranch near Canfield who had seen something she believed the right people needed to know, and who had been trying to find a way to get it out." The lamp on the table was burning steadily. Outside the wind had dropped, and in the absence of wind, the silence was particular and total. She found a way to reach Gray Elk through a network that neither of them should have been able to access without help, Nady said. "I don't know yet how she did it, but she sent him a document, a copy of something, and instructions for what to do with it. And then she became ill." Jesse's hands were flat on the table. He was looking at them. "I didn't know her name until Ruth told me," Nady said. "I only knew her as a woman at a ranch near Canfield who had done something brave and paid for it." The silence in the kitchen was the loudest thing Jesse had heard in 2 years. He stood up carefully the way a man stands when he is maintaining control of something that wants very much to not be controlled, and walked to the back door and opened it and stood in the cold air for a long moment. Behind him, Nady did not speak. She did not move. She gave him the only thing she had to give, which was time and the understanding that what he was feeling was correct and deserved its full space. When he came back in, his face had gone to that place of careful stillness. "She didn't tell me," he said. It was not accusation. It was the plainest possible statement of a fact that had a specific weight. "No," Nady said. "She protected you from it. She shouldn't have had to do it alone." "No," Nady said again. "She shouldn't have." Jesse sat back down. He put both hands around his coffee cup, though the coffee had gone cold. "What does Gray Elk carry?" he asked. "The original order," Nady said. "The written command for the attack signed by Aldridge, and a second document, a contract between Fort Renner Command and a mining company out of Chicago, for development rights to the coal deposits in the Wind River Valley." She paused. "The contract was signed and dated 3 weeks before the meeting Aldridge proposed to me. He had already sold the land before he arranged to clear it." Jesse was very still. "Martha found out about the contract," he said. "She found the document or a copy of it. I believe she took it to someone she thought she could trust with it. And then Aldridge found out she had it." The arithmetic resolved itself completely. All the pieces that had been sitting in wrong relationship to each other for 2 years, the timing of the soldier's visit, the sudden illness, the expression on Owen Slade's face when he said the words "not on a living patient," all of it fell into its correct arrangement. Jesse sat with it. Then he said very quietly, "Owen Slade knows something." "I think so," Nady said. "He's been carrying it alone for 2 years." "Some people," Nady said, "are waiting to be asked the right question by someone they believe will do something with the answer." Jesse looked at her across the table. "I need to talk to him," he said. "Yes," she said. "You do." That same afternoon in the small room above the general store that Ruth Pember let to travelers at fair rates and to permanent guests at rates that reflected her assessment of their character, a young man sat at a writing desk with a lamp burning despite the daylight and a piece of paper in front of him that he had started 3 times and abandoned 3 times. His name was Eddie Aldridge. He was 24 years old, lean and fair-haired, with his father's sharp eyes and his mother's unfortunate habit of feeling things more acutely than was useful in his chosen profession. He had been a soldier for 4 years. He had been his father's son for all 24. The paper in front of him was a letter. Or it was trying to be a letter. The 3 previous attempts were in the cold fireplace in the corner of the room, burned not because they contained anything incriminating, but because they were inadequate, because he had not yet found the way to say the thing he was trying to say, which was that he had made a choice 6 years ago that he could not unmake, but could, perhaps, if he chose correctly, now place in relationship to a different kind of choice. He had been 18. His father had come back from some operation or engagement or whatever the operational language was for what had happened in the Wind River Valley, and his coat had been dark at the sleeve, and his face had been the face of a man who had done something conclusive. He had handed Eddie the coat without explanation. Eddie had understood from the absence of explanation that explanation was not the point. He had burned the coat. He had told himself it was loyalty. He had told himself that sons owed fathers a kind of faith that exceeded the specific, that you did not weigh each act of a man you loved against a standard he had never agreed to be measured by. He had told himself this with considerable force over 6 years, and had achieved only the kind of partial conviction that requires constant maintenance. 2 weeks ago, passing through Canfield on a message run that his father had assigned to him specifically, he had stopped at the general store for tobacco and had found himself in conversation with Ruth Pember, who had the specific quality of directness that made certain kinds of people confess things to her without fully understanding why. He had not confessed, but he had listened, and he had heard in the particular way that a person hears something they already know, the thing that Ruth had not meant to tell him, and had not in fact told him directly, but which had been present in what she said, the way water is present in certain kinds of stone, not visible on the surface, but unmistakably there when you knew what to look for. A woman had come to this town, injured. Apache. His father was looking for her. Eddie looked at the paper on the desk. He thought about the coat in the fireplace. 6 years of ash. He began to write. Owen Slade had a routine that had not changed in 2 years. He woke at 5, made his own coffee because he had not yet found a way to ask anyone else to make it without the asking feeling like an acknowledgement that he needed help, and he drank it at his kitchen table while looking at his case files, the medical records and examination notes that represented the ongoing life of a town in all its minor and major distresses. He saw patients from 8 until noon, took his lunch alone, saw patients again from 2 until 5, and spent his evenings reading medical journals that arrived 2 months late from Philadelphia and sometimes contained information that was startling in its implications for practice. He had not slept well in 2 years. He had not told anyone this. He had attributed the insomnia to age when people noticed the shadows under his eyes, and age was plausible enough that people accepted it because people generally accept the explanation that asks least of them. Jesse Harlow arrived at his back door on a Friday afternoon between patient hours, which told Slade that Jesse understood he would be alone. Jesse came in without particular ceremony and sat down at the kitchen table and looked at Slade with the patient-level gaze that Slade had always found both reassuring and on this particular afternoon somewhat difficult to meet. "I know what you've been carrying," Jesse said. Slade sat down across from him. He did not ask how or who had told him. He found in the moment of hearing those words that the question of mechanism was less urgent than the fact itself, the strange physical relief of hearing someone say directly the thing he had been the only one to hold. "I was afraid," Slade said, "because it was true, and because it was the first thing that needed saying." "I know." "Not theoretical fear." Slade looked at his hands. "She died 3 days after she came to see me. 3 days, Jesse. I had a wife and I had this practice and I had—" He stopped. "I told myself I didn't have enough, that what I had was not proof of anything, just a pattern I thought I recognized. That to say something was to potentially destroy a man on the basis of a guess." "It wasn't a guess," Jesse said. "No." Slade's voice was very quiet. "It wasn't a guess." The afternoon light came through the kitchen window at a low angle. October light, the kind that seemed to arrive already tired from its journey. Somewhere in the town a wagon was moving along the main street, its wheels on the packed earth making their ordinary sound. "She came to me 4 days before she got sick," Slade said. "She said she had found something, a document, a contract between the Army and a private mining company for rights to land in the Wind River Valley. She said she believed Major Aldridge had arranged the attack on the Apache camp to clear the land for the contract. She wanted me to hold a copy for her." He paused. "I told her I would. I took the copy. I put it in this house." He gestured a small, helpless motion. 3 days later she was ill. The symptoms were not consistent with natural fever. I knew that immediately. I had seen the pattern in my reading in case reports from Army medical journals, a specific combination of alkaloids used in water contamination, rare, difficult to trace, the kind of thing that requires both knowledge and access. Jesse's hands were flat on the table, completely still. "The soldiers that stayed at your property," Slade said, "they had access to your well." "Yes." "She never knew they had done it. She thought she was ill. She never connected it." Slade pressed his fingers against his eyes briefly. "I connected it on the 3rd day, and by then it was too late to reverse, and by then I understood that saying something meant placing myself in the same position she was in, and "You had people who depended on you," Jesse said. "That's what I told myself." Slade put his hands down. "That's what I've been telling myself for 2 years. There is a point at which telling yourself something true becomes a way of telling yourself something false. I passed that point a long time ago." He stood up and went to the cabinet on the far wall, the 3rd drawer from the bottom behind the supply of bandages and below the surgical implements. He took out a folded piece of paper, old now, the creases gone brown. He set it on the table in front of Jesse. Jesse looked at it without touching it. "That's her handwriting," he said. "A copy she made of the contract header and Aldridge's name and the mining company's name and the date it was signed." Slade sat back down. 3 weeks before he proposed the peace meeting to Nady. 3 weeks before he arranged to have the land cleared for what he had already sold. Jesse picked up the paper. "Read it. Set it down." He did not say anything for a long moment. The light continued to come through the window at its tired October angle. The wagon on the main street had gone wherever wagons went. "She knew," Jesse said. "She knew it was dangerous and she did it anyway, and she didn't tell me." "She was protecting you," Slade said. "She was wrong to." The words came out level and controlled. "She should have told me. We should have carried it together." "Yes," Slade said. "She should have. But Jesse, she made the choice that she believed was right. She was wrong about the protection, and she was right about the act. They're both true." Jesse looked at the paper on the table. "I'm going to ask you to do something," he said. "I know. Whatever comes next, when it comes." "I know," Slade said again. "I've known it was coming since the morning she died. I've been sitting here for 2 years waiting for the door to open." He looked at Jesse directly. "I'm ready. I should have been ready 2 years ago, but I'm ready now." Jesse folded the paper and put it in his pocket alongside the chain and the blue fabric, the small accumulation of evidence that had been building toward this. "There's one more thing," he said. He told Slade about Gray Elk, about the original order, about the contract, about what Nady had said was coming. Slade listened without interrupting. When Jesse finished, Slade was quiet for a moment. "Jesse," he said, "Aldridge is coming back. He's already been through once. He's not a patient man when he believes he has legal authority on his side. I know. When he comes with paper with a federal order, Hank Pruitt is going to be in a very difficult position." "I know that too." "Hank owes Aldridge something," Slade said carefully. "From before. I don't know the specifics, but I know it exists the way you can tell a beam has gone soft before you put your weight on it." Jesse looked at him. "Does Hank know what Aldridge is?" "No," Slade said. "I don't believe he does. I think Hank is a man who has made himself not look at certain things because looking would require him to do something about them. That's different from knowing." Jesse stood up. "Then we need to change what he's looking at." He went to the door and then stopped his hand on the frame, the same posture Nady had described him using in the doorway of the bedroom on her first conscious day, that way of being present in a threshold without committing to either side of it. "Owen," he said, "for what it's worth, you're the only person she trusted with it. She trusted you because she knew you were a good man. She was right." Slade looked at the empty table where the paper had been. Being a good man and doing the right thing, he said, are apparently not the same qualification. "No," Jesse said, "but the first one makes the second one possible." He paused. "When the time comes." He left. Owen Slade sat at his kitchen table as the afternoon light shifted and dimmed and the shadows came in from the corners of the room. He thought about 2 years of insomnia. He thought about Martha Harlow's face on the last day she was in his examination room, the particular quality of trust in her expression, the trust of a person who believes they have placed something valuable in safe hands. He had failed that trust. He was going to try to fail it for the last time. Ruth Pember knocked on Eddie Aldridge's door. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm looking for Nady." Eddie Aldridge opened the door. "Nady, what's up?" Ruth Pember handed him a piece of paper. "This is from Nady. She says she's not feeling well and needs to talk to you." Eddie Aldridge took the paper and read it. "Nady, what's up?" Ruth Pember handed him a piece of paper. "This is from Nady. She says she's not feeling well and needs to talk to you." Eddie Aldridge took the paper and read it. "Nady, what's up?" Ruth Pember handed him a piece of paper. "This is from Nady. She says she's not feeling well and needs to talk to you." Eddie Aldridge took the paper and read it. "Nady, what's up?" Ruth Pember handed him a piece of paper. "This is from Nady. She says she's not feeling well and needs to talk to you." Eddie Aldridge took the paper and read it. "Nady, what's up?" Ruth Pember handed him a piece of paper. "This is from Nady. She says she's not feeling well and needs to talk to you." Eddie Aldridge took the paper and read it. "Nady, what's up?" Ruth Pember handed him a piece of paper. "This is from Nady. She says she's not feeling well and needs to talk to you." Eddie Aldridge took the paper and read it. "Nady, what's up?" Ruth Pember handed him a piece of paper. "This is from Nady. She says she's not feeling well and needs to talk to you." Eddie Aldridge took the paper and read it. "Nady, what's up?" Ruth Pember handed him a piece of paper. "This is from Nady. She says she's not feeling well and needs to talk to you." Eddie Aldridge took the paper and read it. "Nady, what's up?" Ruth Pember handed him a piece of paper. "This is from Nady. She says she's not feeling well and needs to talk to you." Eddie Aldridge took the paper and read it. "Nady, what's up?" Ruth Pember handed him a piece of paper. "This is from Nady. She says she's not feeling well and needs to talk to you." Eddie Aldridge took the paper and read it. "Nady, what's up?" Ruth Pember handed him a piece of paper. "This is from Nady. She says she's not feeling well," and Ruth Pember knocked on Eddie Aldridge's door above the general store. She had a plate of food and an expression that indicated the food was not the primary purpose of the visit. Eddie let her in. He was not surprised to see her, which told Ruth something about the quality of his conscience. Guilty men were rarely surprised by the arrival of people who seemed to know things. She sat down in the room's single chair. Eddie sat on the edge of the bed. "Your father was here 2 weeks ago," Ruth said. "I know. And you've been here since then under a name that isn't yours." She looked at him. "I've been running rooms over my store for 20 years. I know when a person is hiding from something and when they're hiding from themselves." Eddie said nothing. "You have something to say," Ruth said. "I can see it on you the way mud shows on a white horse. The question is whether you're going to find someone to say it to or whether you're going to fold it up and put it in your pocket and carry it the rest of your life." "It might not matter," Eddie said. "What I can say." "Then it cost you nothing to say it." Ruth set the plate on the desk. "And if it does matter, then you have to ask yourself what kind of person you want to be when this is over. Because it will be over one way or another. Things like this always end. The only question is what they leave behind them." She stood up. "Jesse Harlow is a good man," she said. "Whatever you know, and I believe you know something, he deserves to have it." She went out. Eddie sat with the plate of food growing cold on the desk and the lamp burning down, and the letter he had written and burned 3 times lying somewhere in the cold ash of the fireplace. He thought about a coat, about the weight of a single decision made when he was 18 years old and did not yet understand that some choices did not stay in the moment they were made, but traveled forward into everything that followed. He thought about the woman in Jesse Harlow's back bedroom, who had survived what she had survived and was still carrying the truth of it, because the truth was the only thing Aldridge had not been able to take. He picked up the pen. This time he did not stop until the letter was finished. He read it once. Then he put on his coat and went downstairs and out into the cold Canfield night and walked to Jesse Harlow's ranch because some things should not be done by letter and could not wait until morning. Jesse answered the knock at the back door with the rifle in his hand and then looked at the young man on his porch and held the rifle at his side and said nothing. "My name is Eddie Aldridge," the young man said. "Frank Aldridge is my father, and I think he killed your wife." The wind came off the mountains cold and steady. Behind Jesse in the kitchen, Nadie appeared in the doorway. She looked at Eddie for a long moment with the particular attention she gave to things she was assessing for danger, and then something shifted in her expression. Something that was not quite recognition but was adjacent to it, a kind of apprehension that arrives before the information that explains it. Jesse stepped back from the door. "Come in," he said. Eddie came in out of the dark and stood in the kitchen of the man whose wife his father had murdered, and he looked at the Apache woman who had survived his father's attempt to erase her, and he understood that he had been walking toward this room for 6 years. He sat down at the kitchen table. He reached into his coat, and he put a letter on the table in Martha Harlow's handwriting that had been traveling toward this kitchen for 2 years. The lamp burned steady on the table between them. Outside, the creek ran over its stones in the dark, patient and cold, carrying what the mountains sent down to it. Somewhere in the Wind River country, an old man was moving south. He was carrying something, and he was almost here. The letter was 4 pages long. Martha had written it in the careful, unhurried hand of a woman who understood that she might not have the opportunity to explain herself in person, and so had put everything into the writing of it, every detail, every date, every name, the full weight of what she knew arranged in the precise order of a mind that had always believed in the power of clarity over emotion. Jesse read it standing at the kitchen table. He did not sit down. He stood with both hands flat on either side of the paper and read it the way you read something that is simultaneously confirming what you already know and making it real in a way that knowing alone never quite accomplished. Nadie sat at the table across from him. She did not read over his shoulder. She watched his face. Eddie Aldridge sat in the chair by the window and looked at his hands and did not speak. Martha had found the contract in September of 1883, weeks before the soldiers came through. She had not been looking for it. She had been in Canfield for supplies and had overheard 2 men in the back of the general store talking in the way that men talk when they believe they are not being overheard, with the careless specificity of people whose confidence in their own invisibility exceeds their actual invisibility. She had heard Aldridge's name and the name of a Chicago company and the phrase "cleared for development," and she had understood enough of what she was hearing to know that she needed to understand the rest of it. She had spent 2 weeks finding the rest of it. The letter described in the methodical way of a woman who had been raised to solve problems rather than to report them exactly how she had done this, who she had spoken to, what she had seen, how she had made a copy, and where she had sent it. She had sent it to Gray Elk through a Shoshone trader she had known for years, a man who moved between worlds with the ease of someone claimed entirely by neither, who carried messages, sometimes as a courtesy and sometimes for payment, and who understood that some messages were more important than others. She had sent the copy to Gray Elk because she believed that a document in the hands of the man whose people had been destroyed by the events it described was a document that would eventually find its way to the right authority. She had believed in the long reach of truth, that it was slower than money and slower than power, but that it covered ground that money and power could not hold. She had not told Jesse because she had not wanted him implicated in something that might not work. She had believed she was protecting him. The letter made this plain without apology, written in the voice of a woman who understood she might have been wrong about the method while remaining certain she had been right about the act. The last paragraph was addressed directly to him. Jesse, if you are reading this, then things went the way I was afraid they might. I want you to know that I was not afraid. I want you to know that Clara is the best thing I have ever done, and that you are the reason she is so fine. I want you to know that I do not regret any of it. Not the finding out, and not the sending, and not the not telling you, although I think now that I should have told you. I think I was wrong about that part. I think I was trying to carry it alone because I had always carried things alone, and I had not yet learned that there was another way. I hope you learn it faster than I did. I hope you find someone to stand beside you when the standing is hard. That is the only thing I would ask for you. Not safety, not ease, just someone to stand beside. Jesse folded the letter. He stood with it in his hands for a long moment, the kitchen quiet around him, the lamp burning the wind outside making its sound in the cottonwoods. Then he set the letter carefully on the table and looked at Eddie Aldridge. "Where did you find this?" he said. "A soldier named Briggs," Eddie said. "He rode with my father's detail in September of 1880. He died last year, a horse accident at Fort Renner. When they cleared his belongings, they found it in the lining of his kit bag." Eddie paused. "He was the one who took it from her. I don't know if he kept it out of conscience or calculation, but one of the men sorting his things knew me and sent it to me because he didn't know what else to do with it. Your father doesn't know you have it." "No." Jesse looked at the young man across the kitchen. He was 24 years old, and he had the look of someone who had been waiting for a specific reckoning and had arrived at it feeling neither ready nor able to turn back, which was perhaps the only honest way to arrive at such things. "What made you come here tonight?" Jesse asked. Eddie was quiet for a moment. "Ruth Pember," he said, "and 6 years of burning the wrong things." Jesse looked at Nadie. She was looking at Eddie with that assessing stillness, the quality of attention she brought to things she was not yet certain about. Then something in her expression resolved some internal calculation completed. "Your father is coming back," she said to Eddie. "Not in weeks, in days." "Yes," Eddie said. "I believe so. How many men?" "At least 8, possibly more if he's applied for additional authority, which he will have done." He paused. "He'll have a federal order. He has the connections to produce one quickly. And he'll have a medical certification, a doctor at Fort Renner who signs what my father puts in front of him." "Same mechanism he used for Martha," Jesse said. "The same mechanism he has always used," Eddie said. "Legal authority obtained through relationships he has spent 20 years cultivating. My father is not a man who relies on force when paperwork is available. Force is loud. Paperwork is quiet, and it lasts longer." The three of them sat with this. Jesse thought about what Nadie had said weeks ago, that good men lost to rich men every day in this country. He thought about Hank Pruitt on his porch in the dark saying, "Be careful with the weight of a man who already knew that careful might not be enough." "Gray Elk," Jesse said to Nadie. "How certain are you that he's coming?" "He is coming," she said. "Not uncertainty. Statement of fact. Can you send word? Tell him to move faster." "I sent word 4 days ago." She looked at Jesse. Through Ruth. Jesse looked at her. Then he almost smiled, the particular expression of a man discovering that the people around him have been thinking ahead of him in ways he had not expected. Ruth knows about Gray Elk, he said. Ruth knows about everything that comes through this town, Nady said. She has known for 2 weeks. She did not say anything because she was waiting for you to be ready to hear it. Jesse stood up from the table. He went to the back door and opened it and stood in the cold air for a moment, the lamp behind him throwing his shadow out across the porch boards. The night was clear and cold, and the stars were out in their unreasonable abundance above the Wyoming dark. He thought about Martha standing at her kitchen window making a decision alone that she should not have had to make alone. He thought about Owen Slade sitting with 2 years of silence that had been eating him from the inside. He thought about Nady in the mud at the creek's edge, fingers locked around a chain, keeping her grip after everything else had given out. He came back inside. "We have 3 days," he said. "Maybe 4. We use them." The next morning Jesse went to see Hank Pruitt. He did not go around the edges of it. He sat across from Pruitt in the sheriff's office and laid out what he knew all of it from the soldiers at the ranch to Martha's letter to the document that Owen Slade had held for 2 years to what Nady had told him about the contract and the clearing and the original order that Gray Elk was carrying south. Pruitt listened without interrupting. He was a man who had learned the value of listening fully before speaking, one of the qualities that had made him a good sheriff for 11 years, and that also Jesse knew made him sometimes slow to act on what he had heard. When Jesse finished, Pruitt was quiet for a long time. He tugged at the brim of his hat, a gesture Jesse had seen him use his entire adult life, the physical equivalent of the internal process of sorting. "You understand what you're asking me," Pruitt said. "I'm not asking you anything," Jesse said. "I'm telling you what's true. What you do with it is yours." Pruitt looked at the desk between them. "Frank Aldridge," he said. He said the name the way you say the name of something you have been not looking at directly and are now being required to look at. He pulled 2 of my men out of a situation in Laramie in 1876 that would have ended their careers and possibly their freedom. He did it because I asked him to and because he could. I have been aware since then that he believed I owed him. Did he ever collect? He has never asked me directly for anything." Pruitt paused. "Which is, I have come to understand, more effective than asking. A debt uncollected sits in a man and shapes what he does without requiring explicit instruction. Has it shaped what you've done?" Pruitt looked at Jesse for a long time. "I have not looked as hard as I might have looked at certain things," he said. "I have given the benefit of the doubt in directions where doubt perhaps did not deserve benefit." He stopped. "I have not done anything wrong, but I have sometimes not done things right." Jesse nodded. This was honest, and he respected it. "When he comes with his order," Jesse said, "you are going to have to make a decision." "Yes." "I need to know what decision you're leaning toward." Pruitt stood up and walked to the window and looked out at the main street of Canfield, the general store and the saloon and the church at the far end, and the ordinary traffic of a Thursday morning in a small Wyoming town. "I took an oath to protect the people of this town," he said. "That woman at Jesse Harlow's ranch has been in this town for 3 weeks. She has done nothing wrong in this town. She has not threatened anyone or damaged anything or caused any harm that I can document." He turned from the window. "Whatever she did or did not do before she arrived here inside my jurisdiction, she is a person under my protection." He came back to the desk. "And if a man comes to my door with a federal order that I believe was obtained through the corruption of the process that produced it," he said, "then I have an obligation to delay the execution of that order until the corruption can be verified. That is within my authority as local law enforcement. It is a stretch, but it is a real stretch, not an invented one." Jesse looked at his old friend. "Owen Slade will testify," Jesse said. "About Martha. About what he knows." Pruitt absorbed this. "That's going to be hard for him. He knows that. And the young Aldridge. He has Martha's letter and his own testimony about what he witnessed 6 years ago." Jesse paused. "He's 24 years old and he's trying to do something right. He deserves the opportunity." Pruitt sat down and picked up a pen and set it down without using it. "Jesse," he said, "I sent a wire to the federal prosecutor's office in Cheyenne 2 days ago, before you came to see me this morning." Jesse looked at him. "Owen came to see me first," Pruitt said. "3 days ago. He told me about Martha." Something moved across his face, a brief, unguarded expression of what 2 years of knowing Pruitt had done to him. "I have been making arrangements, quietly, in the way that arrangements need to be made when the man you're making them against has spent 20 years making sure people owe him favors." He looked at Jesse directly. "I have been doing my job," he said. "I should have been doing it sooner, but I am doing it now." Jesse stood up, put his hat on. "One more thing," he said. He told Pruitt about Gray Elk. Aldridge arrived on a Saturday morning. He came the way he always came, without haste, with the deliberate pacing of a man who understood that urgency was a form of information and that withholding it was a form of power. 8 soldiers in full uniform, their horses well groomed, their equipment in order. Aldridge himself in the front, wearing his dress uniform with the careful correctness of a man who understood that appearance was the first argument. He rode to the sheriff's office and dismounted and tied his horse and went inside. Jesse was not there. He was at the ranch, standing on the porch with the rifle leaning against the wall beside him, watching the road into town. Nady was in the kitchen. Clara was at Ruth Pember's, where she had been since the previous evening, Ruth having appeared at dusk with a basket of food and the no-argument tone that she deployed with the precision of a surgical instrument. Nady came to the door. "He's there," she said. Not a question. "He's there." She stood in the doorway behind him. He could feel her there without looking, the particular quality of her stillness, which was different from other people's stillness in the way that certain kinds of silence are different from other kinds, more deliberately constructed, more conscious of itself. "Jesse," she said. "Yeah." "Whatever happens today, I want you to know something." He turned to look at her. She was standing in the doorway with the morning light behind her, wearing the plain blue dress that had become her ordinary clothing here, her dark hair loose, her face carrying the specific quality of a person who has made a decision and is standing in the moment just before acting on it. "I have been a long time not trusting the things I wanted," she said. "Not because I stopped wanting them, but because wanting something and losing it turned out to be worse than not having it at all. I told myself that was practical. It was not practical. It was fear in practical clothing." Jesse looked at her. "I am not going to let fear make this decision," she said. "Whatever happens today." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded once, the slow nod of a man who understands more is being said than the words carry. He turned back to the road. "Neither am I," he said. Aldridge came to the ranch an hour later. He came with Pruitt, which was the arrangement Jesse had expected, and with 2 soldiers, which was 4 fewer than he had brought to town, which told Jesse that Pruitt had been managing the framing of this visit in ways that were not accidental. Jesse stood on the porch. He did not go down the steps to meet them. Aldridge dismounted and looked at the ranch with the appraising gaze of a man who assessed everything he encountered for its utility and vulnerability. Then he looked at Jesse, and his face arranged itself into the expression that Jesse had been hearing described for weeks, the warm concern, the professional sympathy, the performance of a man who has learned to make his calculations look like feelings. "Mr. Harlow," Aldridge said, "my name is Major Frank Aldridge. I apologize for intruding on your property. I'm here on a matter that requires some delicacy." "I know who you are," Jesse said, a brief adjustment behind Aldridge's eyes. He had expected to have more time before the pretense became unnecessary. "Then you know I'm looking for a woman," he said. "An Apache woman who has been traveling alone. She is in a disturbed state of mind, and there are concerns for her safety and the safety of—" "She's not disturbed," Jesse said. "And you know she isn't." Aldridge looked at him for a moment. Then the warmth in his expression underwent a subtle recalibration, the way a lamp adjusts when someone turns the wick. "I have a federal order," he said. He reached into his coat. Pruitt's hand moved slightly toward his side and then stilled. Aldridge produced a folded document. signed by Judge Carver in Cheyenne. It authorizes me to— I've seen the order, Pruitt said. He was standing to Aldridge's left, slightly behind, in the particular position of a man who has placed himself to observe rather than to support. And I've advised Major Aldridge that I'm delaying its execution pending contact with the federal prosecutor's office regarding an active investigation. Aldridge turned to look at Pruitt. The warmth was entirely gone now. "Hank," he said, "you and I have an understanding." "We have a history," Pruitt said. "That's different." The front door of the ranch house opened. Nady stepped onto the porch. She came out without announcement, without ceremony, and stood beside Jesse in the morning light and looked at the man who had arranged the death of her people and the death of Jesse's wife, and who had been hunting her for 2 years with the patient implacability of a man who did not accept outcomes he had not chosen. She looked at him without flinching, without the terror that had once lived in every muscle of her body when she thought of this moment. The terror was still there somewhere in the deep architecture of her. The body remembered what the mind tried to put down. But it was not in charge of her anymore. She had made that decision at some point in the last 3 weeks in the accumulation of mornings at a kitchen table and evenings on a porch, and one night when a man had told her that what was in his house deserved to know what was true, and she had decided that terror was information about the past and not instructions for the present. "Major Aldridge," she said. He looked at her. For a moment, just a moment, something moved across his face that was not performance, not remorse exactly, something older than remorse and further from it, the recognition of a thing he had believed was finished and was discovering was not. "You look well," he said. The words came out with a slight delay, the fraction of a second required to find the right register. "I do," she said, considering. She took one step forward to the edge of the porch so that she was standing fully visible in the light with nothing between her and the open air. "You told me that meeting would bring peace," she said. Her voice was level and clear. "You showed me documents. You answered my questions. You were very convincing." "You were misled," Aldridge said. "I was acting on orders." "You signed the contract 3 weeks before you proposed the meeting," she said. "You had already sold the land. The meeting was not an attempt at peace. It was a mechanism for clearing an obstacle." Aldridge looked at Pruitt. "Sheriff, this woman is speaking," Pruitt said. "Let her finish." Nady looked at Aldridge. "My people trusted me," she said, "because I had earned that trust over years of careful work, and I used that trust to bring them to a place where you were waiting. I did not know I was doing it, but I did it. I have had to live with that." A pause. "Now you are going to live with something." "I have a federal order," Aldridge said. His voice had gone very quiet, the specific quiet of a man controlling something with difficulty. "I have legal authority. Whatever accusations—" The sound of horses on the road turned every head. 2 riders coming from the north, moving at a steady pace that was not rushed but covered ground with the efficiency of people who had been moving for a long time and were nearly at the end of their journey. The first rider was a man in his 50s with a weathered face and a badge on his coat that caught the morning light. Not a sheriff's badge, the star of a United States Marshal. The second rider was very old. He rode with the straight-backed economy of a man who had been on horseback for most of 70 years, wearing the traveling clothes of the Wind River country, moving through the Wyoming morning, with the dignity of someone who had decided a long time ago that what the world thought of him was the world's business and not his. He was Gray Elk, and he was carrying a leather satchel across his saddle that had been on his person for 2 years. Aldridge looked at the old man. Jesse watched Aldridge's face in the moment of recognition and saw what he had been waiting to see. The thing beneath the performance, the real content of the man visible now because the performance had run out of material to work with. What was there was not guilt. It was something harder and colder. The expression of a man who has done what he believed was necessary and still believes it was necessary and is now confronted with the consequence of having been wrong, not about the necessity, but about the completeness of his erasure. He had not erased enough. Aldridge was led past Nady toward the marshal's horse. He stopped beside her close enough that only she could hear, and he spoke in a voice stripped of everything except the flat intention underneath. "This change is nothing permanent," he said. "I have lawyers, I have time, and you will spend whatever is left of your life looking over your shoulder." Nady looked at him. She was still, completely still. Then she leaned forward and said 2 words close to his ear in Apache words that no one else on that porch could hear or understand. Aldridge's face changed. Not fear. Something worse than fear. Something that happens to a man when he is told something he did not know. Someone else knew something specific and irreversible that changes the architecture of everything he thought was secure. Marshal Carew touched his arm. Aldridge moved. Jesse watched Aldridge's face as he walked away and did not look back. Later, when Clara and Ruth had gone inside and the yard was quiet, Jesse asked her, "What did you say to him?" Nady was quiet for a moment, looking at the road where the riders had been. "I told him the name of Gray Elk's grandson," she said. "The boy who came to the meeting in his grandfather's place. The boy whose name Aldridge never knew because the men who follow orders rarely know the names of the people the orders concern." She paused. "I wanted him to know one name, so that for the rest of his life in every room he sits in, he will know that we were people, not obstacles, not a cleared land, people with names." Jesse looked at her. He did not say anything. There was nothing to say that would have been enough. The marshal dismounted and tied his horse and came forward. He was a lean man with the economy of movement that comes from years of consequential work. Not hurrying, not performing, simply arriving with the weight of his office visible in the way he occupied the space around him. "Major Aldridge," he said. "My name is Marshal Dale Carew out of Cheyenne. I've been in contact with the federal prosecutor's office in Missouri and with Sheriff Pruitt here regarding an ongoing investigation." He reached into his coat and produced his own document, a different kind from the one Aldridge had been carrying, one with the heavier weight of a thing that superseded rather than requested. "I have a federal warrant for your arrest on charges of fraud, abuse of military authority, and conspiracy in connection with the deaths of multiple individuals in the Wind River Valley in 1880. He paused. "There is also the matter of Martha Harlow," he said. "The prosecutor's office will be filing additional charges pending examination of new evidence." Aldridge stood very still. The 2 soldiers with him looked at each other and then looked away with the particular expression of men who have just understood that they have been standing on the wrong side of a line and are calculating the distance back to the right one. "This warrant," Aldridge said. His voice had gone to something underneath the performance, something that was neither warm nor cold, just the stripped mechanics of a man processing a reversal. "On whose testimony?" "This woman's word, mine," said Owen Slade. He had come up the road on foot while everyone's attention was on the marshal and the old man. He was slightly out of breath and his hat was not quite straight, and he looked like a man who had been moving faster than he usually moved towards something he had been moving away from for too long. He stopped beside the porch steps. "I am the physician of record for Martha Harlow," he said, "and I have a sworn statement prepared for the prosecutor's office describing her symptoms, my diagnosis, and the conversation I had with her 4 days before she died." He looked at Aldridge with the specific quality of a man setting down something heavy. "I should have made this statement 2 years ago. I did not. I am making it now." Aldridge looked at Slade for a long moment. Then he looked at Jesse. "She's gone," Jesse said quietly, "and you don't get to make her gone twice." Gray Elk had dismounted. He stood at the edge of the group, his leather satchel in his hands, waiting with the patience of a man for whom waiting had become a form of action over 2 years of careful movement toward this place. He looked at Nady. She looked back at him. Something passed between them in that look that was not translatable into the language being spoken around them. 2 years of loss and distance, and the particular grief of people who are the last carriers of something that needs carrying. The weight of being the ones who remembered. Gray Elk opened the satchel. He placed a bundle of documents in Marshal Carew's hands. "The order," he said in accented but clear English. "Signed, and the contract. Dated." He looked at Aldridge. "I have been carrying these for 2 years. A woman gave one of them to me because she believed the truth should not die with her." He paused. She was right. The arrest was without drama. Aldridge did not resist. He stood in Jesse Harlow's front yard in his dress uniform and held out his hands, and Marshal Carew put the irons on him with the professional efficiency of a man who had done this many times and found no ceremony in it. The 2 soldiers who had ridden with him were questioned by Pruitt and released pending further investigation, both of them displaying the grateful cooperation of men who had not known the full extent of what they had ridden into. Eddie Aldridge had come out from behind the barn where he had been standing since the riders arrived. He stood in the yard and watched them put the irons on his father. He was very pale and very still. Aldridge looked at his son once, just once before the marshal turned him toward the horses. Eddie did not look away. He stood and received his father's gaze and let it land, and did not do anything with it except stand there and hold it, which was perhaps the hardest and most necessary thing he had ever done. His father turned away, and was led to his horse, and was taken down the road toward Cheyenne, and everything that waited there, the prosecutor and the courtroom, and the testimony, and the slow machinery of consequence that he had believed he was too well connected to encounter. He had been wrong about that. Caleb. Pruitt stood beside Jesse on the porch after the marshal rode east with his prisoner. He did not say anything for a moment. Then, the landslide story. Jesse looked at him. "I told Carew 2 weeks ago," Pruitt said. "We agreed he would come quietly without wire announcements, without anything that might reach Fort Renner through the wrong channel. We agreed that Aldridge needed to believe he had more time than he had." He tugged the brim of his hat. "A man who believes he has time walks into rooms he would otherwise avoid." Jesse looked at the empty road. "You let me think the marshal might not make it," he said. "I needed you to act like a man who wasn't certain of the outcome," Pruitt said, "because Aldridge was watching, and Aldridge is very good at reading certainty." A pause. "I'm sorry for it." Jesse was quiet for a moment. "Don't be," he said. "It worked." After they had gone, the yard was very quiet. Pruitt went to speak with Gray Elk and the marshal. Owen Slade sat down on the bottom porch step and took off his glasses and cleaned them for a long time. Eddie stood by the fence with his back to the house, looking out at the pasture where the dun mare was standing at the fence line, watching the road, waiting for something. Jesse stood on the porch. Nady stood beside him. They did not speak for a while. The morning continued to move around them, the wind coming down from the mountains, the cottonwoods making their sound, the ordinary world reasserting itself with the indifference it maintained toward everything that happened within it. "It's not finished," Nady said. "The trial, the testimony, months." "I know. I will have to go to Cheyenne, possibly further." She paused. "Gray Elk also. The marshal will need statements." "I know that too." She looked at him. He was looking out at the yard, at the place where Aldridge had stood an hour ago, at the indented marks in the frost where the horses had been. "Jesse," she said. He looked at her. "I need to ask you something," she said, "and I need you to answer it honestly, not kindly." "Ask." "When you found me at the creek, you brought me here because it was the right thing to do. You kept me here because it was the right thing to do. At some point between then and now it became something else." She held his gaze. "I need to know if what it became is real, not gratitude, not obligation, not the shape of something you needed that I happen to fit into." Jesse was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet he used when a question deserved actual thought rather than the reflexive answer that arrived before the thinking did. "You want me to tell you the difference," he said. "Yes." He turned to face her fully. "Obligation feels like weight," he said, "like something you carry because you have to and you are waiting for it to be over." He paused. "This doesn't feel like that. This feels like the opposite of weight. This feels like the first time in 2 years that I have been fully present in my own life instead of standing slightly outside it watching it go by." He reached out and took her hand, carefully, the way he did everything with the deliberateness of a man who understood that the manner of a thing was as important as the thing itself. "Martha told me to find someone to stand beside," he said. "I think she knew I was not good at finding things I needed without being pointed at them." A pause. "You were not the shape of something I needed. You were a specific person who changed the shape of what I needed by being who you are." Nadie looked at him for a long moment. "That is a very honest answer," she said. "You asked for honest." "I did." She did not look away. "I am going to Washington after the trial. The prosecutor wants me as a witness for the broader investigation. There are other cases, other contracts. It could be a year." "I know. A rancher cannot leave his ranch for a year." "No," Jesse said. "He can't." He looked at her. "But a rancher can wait for a year. That's different." She studied his face. "You would wait," she said. "I would wait," he said simply. She was quiet for a moment. The wind moved through the cottonwoods. Clara's voice came from somewhere down the lane. Ruth's answering voice, the two of them returning from town with their particular companionable noise. "I would come back," Nadie said. "I want you to understand that. I am not someone who runs from things they want to come back to." "I know that," Jesse said. "I have seen what you run toward." She looked at him for another moment. Then she stepped closer, and she put her free hand against his face the way you touch something you want to verify is real, and she held his gaze and he held hers, and what passed between them in that look was not a conclusion, but a beginning. The particular beginning that is possible only when two people have seen each other clearly in bad light and difficulty and loss, and have decided that what they see is worth the staying. She rose up and kissed him. It was not dramatic. It was quiet and certain, the kind of thing that happens when two people have been moving toward it without naming it and arrive at it together, and the arriving feels less like an event and more like a recognition. When she pulled back, her forehead rested against his chin. "Canfield," she said. "Canfield," he agreed. Clara came up the lane at a run, her coat flying open, her notebook under her arm, Ruth Pember following at a pace that suggested she had given up on keeping up. She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and looked at the yard, and then at her father and Nadie standing on the porch together, and with the particular perceptive accuracy of a child who notices what adults think they are hiding, she looked at their hands. They were still holding hands. Clara looked at this for a moment, then she looked at her father. "Did the bad man go away?" "Yes," Jesse said. "For real this time?" "For real this time." Clara considered this with the seriousness she brought to important information. "Good," she said. "Because I drew a picture of us, and I want to show it to Nadie, and I want it to be a happy picture, not a scared one." She went up the porch steps and through the front door without waiting for anyone to follow, which was how Clara generally moved through the world. Ruth Pember arrived at the foot of the steps and looked up at Jesse and Nadie with the expression of a woman who has worked very hard for a specific outcome and is allowing herself a brief moment of satisfaction at having achieved it. "Owen is all right," she said to Jesse. "I checked on him. He looks like a man who has put down something he's been carrying too long. He's going to sleep tonight." A pause. "So am I." She looked at Nadie. "Gray Elk wants to speak with you when you're ready," she said. "He said to tell you there is no hurry. He said he has waited 2 years, and another hour is nothing." Nadie nodded. Ruth looked between the two of them one more time, and then she went past them through the front door after Clara pulling it shut behind her, giving them a moment that she had correctly assessed they needed. Jesse and Nadie stood on the porch in the October morning. The cottonwoods moved in the wind. The creek ran somewhere below the slope over its stones, carrying what the mountains sent down to it, the same as always, patient and cold, and keeping its counsel. "In the spring," Nadie said. "What?" "When I come back. You said you would wait." She was looking out at the ranch, the yard, and the barn, and the pasture, and the line of mountains on the horizon. "I want to come back in the spring." "Why spring?" "Because spring is when things start," she said. I have had enough of beginnings in the cold." Jessie looked out at the same view. She was looking at the ordinary, beautiful endurance of it, the land going on to the mountains, and the mountains going on to the sky. "Spring," he said. 3 days later, Nady and Gray Elk and Marshal Carew rode north together toward Cheyenne. Jessie stood at the fence line with Clara beside him and watched them go. The 3 riders getting smaller against the vastness of the Wyoming morning, moving toward the thing that needed doing, carrying the truth of it with them. Clara slipped her hand into his. They stood like that for a while, watching the road. "Papa," Clara said. "Yeah. When people go away, they come back, right? If they said they would." Jessie looked down at his daughter, at the face that had Martha's directness and something else in it that was entirely its own, some quality that was still becoming itself, still finding its full shape. "The right people do," he said. Clara thought about this. Then she nodded, satisfied, the nod of a child who has received information she will store and build on. She squeezed his hand. They stood together at the fence line as the riders disappeared over the far ridge, and the road was empty again, and the morning continued to move around them unhurried and indifferent and beautiful. The cottonwoods made their sound. The creek ran below the slope. The mountains stood in their permanent arrangement against the sky, the same as they had always been, the same as they would be, not caring about the small, fierce lives being lived in their shadow, not needing to because the land did not need to care to sustain what it sustained. Jesse Harlow stood at his fence line in Wyoming in October and looked at the empty road and felt the specific quality of a feeling he had not felt in 2 years, the feeling of time ahead. Time that was not only to be survived, but to be used, time that had shape and direction and something at the end of it worth moving toward. He was a man who had learned to live in the cold. He could wait for spring. 5 months later, on a morning in March, when the snow had retreated to the high places and the cottonwoods along Canfield Creek were showing their first green, a rider came up the road from the south. Clara saw her first. She came running from the barn to the porch, her boots loud on the boards, her voice carrying across the yard the way a 7-year-old's voice carries when it contains something too large to hold at normal volume. "Papa, Papa, it's her. It's Nady." Jessie came out of the house and looked at the road. The rider was still a quarter-mile out, moving at an easy pace, a horse he did not recognize carrying someone he did. Dark hair loose in the March wind, sitting straight in the saddle the way she sat with the economy of a person who had been on horseback most of her life and found no particular drama in it. He put on his hat. He went down the porch steps. He walked out through the gate and down the lane, and he kept walking until she pulled up in front of him and looked down at him from the saddle with an expression that was not quite a smile and not quite relief, and was entirely itself, entirely hers. "Spring," she said. "Spring," he agreed. She dismounted. Clara arrived at a dead run and collided with her at the waist and held on, and Nady put both arms around the girl and held on back, and Jesse stood in the March morning on the road in front of his ranch and watched the two of them and felt something in his chest that he did not have a name for yet, but that he was in no particular hurry to name. Some things were better carried than defined. The cottonwoods along the creek were green at the tips. He reached out and took Nady's hand when she straightened up, and the 3 of them walked back through the gate together into the morning, into the ordinary, extraordinary continuation of a life that had found its shape again. The creek ran below the slope the same as it always had, patient and unhurried, carrying what the mountains sent down to it. The mountains held their positions against the sky, and Canfield was quiet in the way that places are quiet when everything that was supposed to happen has happened, and what comes next is simply life, which is the best thing that can come next. End.